couple of people have requested that I do a video on intermittent fasting, which is very popular right now, almost to the point of being a fad. But I should state right off the bat that I have written extensively on intermittent fasting, including all the health benefits in detail, all the methodologies of intermittent fasting, in other words, the various types of intermittent fasting, which I'll refer to as IF in this video. All of this has been covered in extreme depth in my Applied Metabolics newsletter, www.appliedmetabolics.com. I also intend to have an update since I wrote the article, which is not that old. It's about a year or two old. There's been even more information as far as science goes related to intermittent fasting, and I will be writing an update soon in my Applied Metabolics newsletter. But in this video, I just wanted to give you an overview of intermittent fasting for those of you that really don't know what it is or how it works or what the advantages are. Fasting, of course, has been a practice throughout human evolution. Ancient hunter-gatherers didn't have supermarkets, refrigerators, or food available. Sometimes they couldn't find anything to eat. As a result, humans evolved to be able to function without food for extended periods of time. This is called the feast or what's the other one? Feast or something. In other words, you either have a lot of food or you don't have a lot of food. But I can't remember the second word. But the point, I need to take more smart nutrients. But anyway, the point is that the way humans evolved is they eat for pretty good for a day or two. Like let's say the ancient hunters, Stone Age, they'd hunt for game or something like that. They eat it, they feed their family, and then they'd be out of food. They'd have to hunt for more game. They might not even find it for a day or two, and that day or two they would wind up not eating. So, they were doing a form of intermittent fasting. Like I say, it dates from ancient times. And of course, it's also involved in a lot of religions. Judaism has a fasting on the most sacred day, Yom Kippur. You have the Islamic Ramadan, and there's Buddhists. All various religions also observe fasting. There are usually very short periods, but again, this has been done for thousands of years. My point being that the body is fairly well accustomed to adjusting food intake without any real harm, unless, of course, you go too long without food. Eventually, your body will start to consume itself, but that we're not going to get into. But now, what are the various methods of fasting? One of them is called the 16-8 method, 16/8. It's also called the Lean Gains Protocol. This involves skipping breakfast and restricting your daily eating period to 8 hours. It's also called time-restricted eating, such as eating between, let's say, 1 and 9 p.m., and then you fast for 16 hours in between. So that's the 16/8 or Lean Gains type of intermittent fasting. Then you have something called Eat, Stop, Eat. This involves fasting for 24 hours, once or twice a week. For example, not by night eating from dinner one day until dinner the next day. And again, then you go back to regular eating. Another very popular one is the 5-2 diet. 5-2, there's like a ratio, 5,2. With this method, you consume only 500 to 600 calories on 2 non-consecutive days of the week. But eat normally the other 5 days. This is a very popular method. A lot of people have claimed to have lost a good amount of weight using this. In other words, again, 2 days a week, you basically go on a starvation diet. They call it a fast, but it's basically 500 to 600 calories, but in not 2 consecutive days. Let's say you go on Wednesday and then you go on Sunday, something like that. Don't do it 2 days together. And the rest of the time you eat normally. Another technique is alternate day fasting. You don't eat anything on fasting days, and alternate fasting days with unrestricted eating days. So one day you fast, next to eat, one day you fast, next to eat. This type of eating I don't recommend for anybody involved in fasting. I don't recommend for anybody involved in bodybuilding or fitness, because it's too many days without food. It'll probably lead to a catabolic effect in muscles. I don't recommend the alternate day fasting. Alternate day modified fasting is, now this is a little bit better. You consume 25% of your baseline energy needs. In other words, you reduce your daily caloric intake by about 25% on the fasting days, and then on the other days you eat whatever you want, unrestricted. That one's not bad. That one's not going to hurt lean mass. It's a little bit easier on the mind, because basically you got to figure out, you got to do a little calculations. You can find this stuff online. You got to figure out what your basal metabolic rate is, how many calories you're burning at rest, and you reduce that amount of calories by 25%. I'm sorry, energy needs. That would be resting metabolic rate plus your typical daily energy needs, whether light energy, medium, or heavy energy if you're working out. Whatever your total energy needs, that's what you're going to reduce by 25%. Just want to make that clear. Not resting metabolic rate. It's the energy, the daily energy needs that you reduce by 25%. And that's on the fasting days. And then on the other days, unrestricted, whatever you eat normally. Periodic fasting is fasting 1 to 2 days a week, eating no food, but eating normally the other 5 days of the week. Again, that's a fairly easy one to do. Now, what are some of the advantages of intermittent fasting as far as health goes? Well, growth hormone. Growth hormone people don't realize growth hormone acts as a counter-regulatory hormone, they call it, meaning that it helps to balance the blood glucose level. That's why bodybuilders and athletes, when they take huge amounts of growth hormone, one of the classic side effects that happens every time is they get greatly elevated blood glucose. It's called hyperglycemia. This can cause some bodily damage. So a lot of the athletes and bodybuilders counteract that by also using insulin. Insulin, of course, brings down the blood glucose. This is where you get the combination of growth hormone, insulin, and anabolic steroid. But the point being here is that when you're not eating, after about maybe a couple of hours, doesn't happen right away, your body starts to kick out larger amounts of growth hormone. Of course, growth hormone stimulates fat mobilization, not oxidation. To oxidize fat, you have to take in oxygen. You have to be doing something. You have to be exercising. But what growth hormone does very well is it pulls the fat out of the fat cells and allows you to oxidize it through activities such as exercise. Now, when you go on a fast, your growth hormone levels, your resting growth hormone levels, will increase about 5 times over normal rates. And again, that has benefits for fat loss and muscle gains, and other benefits of growth hormone. It's almost like taking growth hormone injections without the side effects. Another great advantage of intermittent fasting is insulin. Insulin sensitivity improves. Right now, there's an epidemic of prediabetes. Prediabetes is defined as insulin insensitivity. It's the forerunner to type 2 diabetes. Diabetes mellitus used to be called adult onset. However, type 2 now shows up in children as young as 11 years of age because of bad eating, such as a lot of fructose and inactivity. They're just playing with their video games. They're not going out and being active, playing ball games. So they wind up getting fat in their liver, and they get insulin insensitivity. When you go on a fast, your insulin sensitivity improves, and your levels of resting insulin drop dramatically. Remember, when insulin levels go down, it opens the door to burning more fat. The less insulin you secrete, the more fat you can burn, because insulin is a storage hormone. Among its effects is to stimulate lipogenesis, or the development of additional fat in fat cells. So when you tune down or turn down your insulin levels, you open the door to increase fat oxidation. There's big controversy about insulin. This is not a controversy. This is a biochemical fact that when insulin is high, you burn less body fat. And when you're intermittent fasting, your insulin levels go down, resting insulin levels. And by the way, resting insulin levels are one of the key characteristics of people that live a long time. People that live to over 100 always have low resting insulin levels. Just a factoid there I threw in. Another advantage of intermittent fasting is cellular repair. When you're fasted, your cells initiate cellular repair process. This is called autophagy. This is very important. I'm going to do an article on this in my Applied Metabolics newsletter, because nobody ever talks about this. We talk about protein synthesis, all the other fairly common mechanisms of building muscle, but one overlooked effect is called autophagy. It's basically the opposite of anabolism. It's kind of a catabolic effect, but it's a good catabolic effect, because when your body undergoes autophagy, it clears out all the crap that builds up in the body, dead cells, in the muscle. It clears out muscle debris, stuff that can accumulate in muscle that can interfere with muscle building. And you have to have a process of autophagy to actually gain muscle. So in this respect, because intermittent Internet fasting. Internet fasting, that's another term. Internet fasting is defined as getting away from the internet completely for at least 2 days, but that's another story. Anyway, but what I was going to say is intermittent fasting, it actually has an anabolic effect because it promotes this autophagy, and autophagy, like I say, allows your muscles, the muscle repair to go on much more efficiently, so you actually gain muscle and strength faster. And autophagy is also associated with increased longevity. In other words, it helps your body clear out these dead cells that get in the way, senescent cells, all that stuff. That's, to me, honestly, I've studied fasting quite a bit when I researched those articles for my newsletter. And to me, the most impressive thing about intermittent fasting is the fact that it actually boosts autophagy significantly. That to me is the key, not the weight loss stuff. It's the autophagy effect. It's tremendous effect. As a matter of fact, some scientists have stated that if you do regularly undergo intermittent fasting, you get all the longevity benefits of caloric restriction. Caloric restriction is defined as reducing your daily calories by 30% or more. And several species of animal, fish, mice, rodents, dogs, whenever you reduce their calories by about 30%, you increase the longevity of these animals. There's no actual human proof, but they do think it exists in humans. However, it's very hard to lower your daily intake by 30% on a consistent basis. You're going to be very hungry, and you're going to get very skinny too. And you're not going to build much muscle on that because you're not going to be able to get enough protein. So an alternative is intermittent fasting because it gives you about 99.9% of the benefits as far as health and longevity of caloric restriction with only brief periods of caloric restriction. You don't have to kill yourself. You can eat regular food most of the time. Another advantage of intermittent fasting is gene expression. There are changes in the function of genes. As I said, it changes the function of genes related to longevity. It promotes longevity genes. Short-term fasting may increase your metabolic. Now, you might think, you might say to yourself, wait a minute, if I'm not eating, I heard that when you lower calories, your resting metabolic rate goes down. It's kind of a protective mechanism of the body to prevent your body from consuming itself and going into a large catabolic state. So you would think, wait a minute, intermittent fasting, isn't that going to lower my resting metabolism? Actually, what the studies show is that short-term fasting, not eating for a week. If you don't eat for a week, your resting metabolism is going to drop down to nothing. But short-term fasting, like intermittent fasting, over a couple of hours, actually increases your metabolic rate by 3.6 to 14%, and it protects against disease. A 2014 review study in the journal Translational Research found that this eating pattern, meaning intermittent fasting, can cause a 3 to 8% weight loss over 3 to 24 weeks, which is a significant amount compared to most weight loss studies. I should also point out that more recent studies have shown they've compared head-to-head intermittent fasting with classic caloric restriction, and the truth is they both resulted in about the same amount of weight loss. However, intermittent fasting, if you think about it, is an easier way to diet because you don't have to be on a diet all the time. You're only dieting, maybe 2-3 times a week at the most, maybe twice a week. And, and the rest of the time you're eating normally, and you wind up getting the same weight loss as restricting calories 7 days a week. So in that sense, intermittent fasting is a superior form of weight loss. That same study also showed that people who, when they lost the weight, they lost 4 to 7% of their waist circumference. In other words, they lost 4 to 7% of the fat around the waist, and that's indicative of also a loss of what they call deep-lying abdominal fat, also known as visceral fat. Visceral fat is the most dangerous type of body fat. It's the type that you can't see. It's the type that you can see is subcutaneous. That's right below the skin. Visceral fat is deep-lying fat. It kind of forms around your internal organs. It builds up in your liver. Visceral fat is very closely associated with insulin resistance, type 2 diabetes, cardiovascular disease, and increased mortality. Very, very dangerous, visceral fat. The reason that visceral fat is so dangerous is because, as I've said in past videos, fat cells release over 100 inflammatory chemicals, which causes systemic inflammation, which causes your body to break down. But that's another subject. A 2011 study published in the journal Obesity Reviews found that intermittent fasting produced less muscle tissue loss compared to regular calorie-restricted diets. Very important point for those of you, because I've been asked, by people. They say, "Hey, I'm thinking of doing an intermittent fasting. Is that going to cause me to lose muscle because I'm not eating?" Well, they've done some studies, and most of the studies, in fact, a couple of them involve bodybuilders involved in weight training, have showed that you get very minimal muscle tissue loss if you follow a proper IF protocol, intermittent fasting protocol. There's one very important point about this, though. When you start eating again after you break the fast, very, very important to ensure for the next couple of days, when you're not fasting, to get an adequate amount of protein. Otherwise, you will lose muscle. The 1 or 2 studies of athletes who showed that they lost muscle with intermittent fasting, these people did not eat sufficient protein after they broke the fast. That will cause muscle loss. If any of you are worried about losing muscle during the fast, you might want to take a little supplement, branch chain amino. No, can't take any protein powder because that would be breaking the fast. But a little bit of 5 grams here and there of the 3 branch chain amino acids, leucine, isoleucine, and valine. That will, it's more of a psychological thing because you're not going to lose much muscle anyway. But if you're worried about it, you could pop a couple of branch chain amino acids. It's not going to reduce the benefits of the fast, but it's good for you psychologically. So what are the benefits of intermittent fasting include? As I said, weight loss benefits. Intermittent fasting can help you lose that belly fat and fat all over without having to restrict calories all the time. Compared to staying on a calorie-restricted diet 7 days a week. Insulin resistance. Intermittent fasting can reduce insulin resistance, lowering blood sugar by 3 to 6%, and fasting insulin by 21 to 30%. Now, what that means is lowering insulin by 31%. What you're talking here is a complete ending of prediabetes and very likely a complete prevention of type 2 diabetes. Type 2 diabetes is in epidemic proportions all over the world right now, as is fatty liver. But in other words, intermittent fasting will lower your insulin to the extent where your body gets more sensitive to insulin, and you're no longer insulin sensitive. You no longer have pre-diabetic, and you're no longer at risk for type 2 diabetes, and you're no longer at risk for the 7th leading cause of death, which is type 2 diabetes. Horrible way to die. I'm not going to get into what happens, but my father died of complications of diabetes, so I'm quite familiar with it. Intermittent fasting, as I said, remember I just told you that fat cells release a lot of inflammatory mediators, cytokines and adipokines. I'm not going to go into that. That's a different topic which I cover in my Applied Metabolics newsletter. But what you need to know is that intermittent fasting does show that it lowers several markers of systemic inflammation. So intermittent fasting will lower systemic inflammation, which is extremely healthy because systemic inflammation is the root of every major degenerative disease, cardiovascular disease, type 2 diabetes, brain degeneration, Alzheimer's disease, and Parkinson's disease. They all have one thing in common: a great amount of inflammation, systemic inflammation. Intermittent fasting is very good for your heart. Intermittent fasting may reduce what they call the bad cholesterol, low density lipoprotein, which is not really bad. I don't like when they call it bad, because LDL, or low density lipoprotein, that's your main cholesterol carrier. That's what carries cholesterol in the blood. And among the places it carries cholesterol to, and I've said this before, is to your testes, where once the LDL reaches your testes, a protein called STAR takes over. It grabs the cholesterol from the LDL. It transports it into the testes to cells called the Leydig cells, and they start a 5-step process that turns the cholesterol into testosterone. And the same goes for estrogen and every other steroid. So to call LDL cholesterol bad is really a misnomer. That makes no sense. But when it's oxidized, it really is bad, because oxidized LDL is closely associated with cardiovascular disease. Intermittent fasting lowers LDL cholesterol. It lowers blood triglycerides, which are fat circulating in the blood. It lowers inflammatory markers like a C-reactive protein. And it lowers blood sugar, as I said, blood glucose, and insulin resistance. These are all risk factors for cardiovascular disease, all lowered by intermittent fasting. Cancer. Animal studies suggest that intermittent fasting may prevent various types of cancer. I'll get to that in a minute. It's very good for your brain, intermittent fasting. It increases the brain hormone, brain-derived neurotropic factor, and which also increases the growth of new nerve cells. And as such, it can offer preventive effects against Alzheimer's disease and Parkinson's disease. By the way, you also stimulate BDNF when you do exercise, especially aerobic exercise. This is why exercise is so good for your brain, and doing exercise alone prevents Alzheimer's disease at 47% decreased risk of Alzheimer's if you exercise regularly. And now you know the reason, because it increases brain-derived neurotropic factor, which is a repair protein. It repairs damaged neurons in the brain. Intermittent fasting does that too. If you do intermittent fasting and you do exercise, you're getting a double effect. You're really treating your brain well when you do those things. And intermittent fasting is, as I said earlier, very good for anti-aging. As I said, it mimics caloric restriction, which is the only established way, at least in animals, of extending longevity. Intermittent fasting mimics that because of all these factors I just discussed. Rats that go on a fast, or even an intermittent fast, or even time-restricted eating, they live 36 to 83% longer than rats that eat ad libitum. In other words, they live 36 to 83% longer than rats that eat whatever they want. Fasting, I should point out, this is very important now. Fasting is not for everybody. If you already have like blood glucose problems, when you tend to be hypoglycemic really fast, they call that reactive hypoglycemia, you might want to be real careful with intermittent fasting, because it can cause real problems if your blood glucose goes low enough. In other words, if you get the hypoglycemia effect gets too great, you could go into a coma. You could pass out because your brain's not getting enough fuel. If you can get by the first couple of hours, however, your body will start to produce ketones, which are byproducts of fat metabolism, which the brain can use as fuel, even better than glucose. So nothing's going to happen if you can last for a couple of hours, right? But if you do have that problem, you better be careful. Another thing to consider is nobody really knows why. It must be related to estrogen or something like that. But fasting isn't as beneficial for women, I hate to say it, as it is for men. For example, one study showed that it improved insulin sensitivity in men, but it worsened blood sugar control in women. I'm not sure of the reason. I'm sure if you look at the differences between men and women, besides the obvious anatomical differences, the main differences involves the extent of hormone release. Women produce a lot more estrogen, progesterone, and certain other hormones than men. There's also autoimmune factors. Women's immune systems are more tuned than men. All of these factors may play a role in why women don't respond as well to intermittent fasting. And I'm not saying that women can't use intermittent fasting. What I'm saying is a lot of women might notice problems with it, especially with blood glucose, and it just might not be good for them. They might not be able to handle it. There's not much you can do about it. They'll just have to go into caloric restriction or carb restriction. Although human studies on this topic are unavailable, studies in rats have found that intermittent fasting can make female rats emaciated, masculinized. In other words, their estrogen is dependent on caloric intake. You have to understand, when women don't consume enough calories, there's a message sent to the hypothalamus of the brain. It stops releasing gonadotrophin-releasing hormone. Then it stops releasing luteinizing hormone and FSH. To make a long story short, when women take in too few calories, their estrogen production stops. It's almost like it stops working. It's like cutting a guy's testes off with the testosterone. So when this happens, remember, the women are still producing some testosterone from their adrenal glands, so they can actually, this happens in rats, because they're now producing testosterone, not producing estrogen, the rats get masculinized, and this is what happens when female rats go on fasting regimes. They also become infertile, again, because of the lack of female hormones, and they miss their menstrual cycle. There's no menstrual cycles. And this happens in women athletes, women bodybuilders. If any female bodybuilder or fitness athlete, or what else do they have? Bikini, any of these people, if they drop their body fat below 11%, their menstruation stops. And now you know why, because the body considers that when they're not getting enough calories, it senses that as a starvation situation, and as a protective defense, it basically turns off the female hormones. I'm simplifying it, but that's why women who are very low in body fat, they don't have their menstrual cycles. And it can happen when women fast also. Now, as far as side effects of intermittent fasting, IF, isn't that what they call Mission Impossible, the IF force? Anyway, the main side effect of intermittent fasting, of course, what do you expect? Hunger. Hunger is a side effect that you may also feel weak, and your brain might not perform as well as it used to, because your brain is dependent on glucose, and it takes a couple of hours, some people longer than others, to produce these ketones, which your brain will be able to start working again. So, some people are more sensitive. Their brain's going to be skipping quite a bit in the first couple of hours, and memory lapses and no ability to focus. There are ways around that. You can't do it on a fast. I was going to say there's a couple of smart nutrients you could take and caffeine, but unfortunately these would relieve these brain problems, but you can't do it on a fast. So it's just going to happen. You just have to get through the first couple hours and allow the ketones to get in. Allow the ketones to get into the body. It's only temporary effect, as it can take some time for your body to adapt to the new meal schedule. Remember, one thing that I want to leave you with also, with a final point on intermittent fasting, very important to exercise, especially lift weights during fasting, to help maintain lean mass. And that's true for any type of diet. Resistance exercise, dozens and dozens of studies have known help retain lean mass when you're on any type of diet. And that includes intermittent fasting. It's up to you. I mean, if you want to work out when you're actually on the fast, that's fine. Some people can do that with no problem, because you're still gonna have liver glycogen, and you're gonna still have the muscle glycogen, which is the main source of fuel for weight training workouts. Though that glycogen comes from what you ate the day before the fast, so there's no reason why you couldn't work out during a fast. But the point is, it is important to lift weights, because when you lift weights, you send signals within the muscle that kind of maintains an anabolic effect in the muscle, and it prevents muscle loss. So don't get lazy. You do have to, if you don't want to work out during the fast, make sure you work out right after the fast. Don't skip weight training workouts. As I said, you can ingest some supplements during the fast, no food, but the one problem with that is fat-soluble vitamins, vitamin A, D, E, and K. Unfortunately, they require a form of fat from food. You don't have to have a lot, like a tablespoon of extra virgin olive oil, 2 pats of butter, something like that. You don't need a lot of fat to absorb these fat-soluble nutrients, but you do need some. However, in intermittent fasting that just lasts a couple hours, you're not going to be deficient in vitamins in just a couple hours, so it's not something to be concerned about. So I just threw that in just to be complete, but you don't even have to think about that. You're not going to be deficient in any of these fat-soluble vitamins within the space of 8 hours or whatever it takes for you to fast there. So that's about it. As I said, in an upcoming issue of my Applied Metabolics newsletter, I will have an update on intermittent fasting, brand new information about some of the physiological effects and very interesting stuff about the health effects also. My Applied Metabolics newsletter, www.appliedmetabolics.com. I also cover supplements, exercise science, hormonal therapy, anti-aging research, ergogenic aids, fat loss techniques that really work, women's health. 40 to 50 pages every month, more like a monthly ebook than a newsletter. Most newsletters are just 1 or 2 the average newsletter is a page or 2 of absolute trash. Certainly not applied to my newsletter, which is, from what I've seen a couple of digital publications. I think my newsletter is the most in-depth of any digital publication on health, fitness, and exercise and nutrition that I've seen, bar none. And there's a reason for that, because I have 57 years of experience, can't be matched by anybody. That includes study and empirical experience, such as actually training in the gym. I know what works and what doesn't work as far as training and supplements. I include all my experiences in my Applied Metabolic newsletter. When you subscribe, I'll send you an invitation to join my private Applied Metabolics Facebook page. You can also send me short questions via the email portal on my Applied Metabolics website. I only answer questions from subscribers. I don't answer unsolicited questions. I just don't have the time, and I feel that my subscribers deserve that as a kind of a bonus for subscribing. You are welcome to leave comments under these videos. I probably won't answer them. Occasionally, depending on my mood, or if it's a really compelling question, I might answer it. but most of the time I don't. I only answer questions from subscribers. But if you want to have the best friend you'll ever have, go to your local shelter. Bruno is around here somewhere, and adopt a dog. By the way, I just want to add, my usual people have left messages under my videos talking about my camera being bad and they can't hear me and all this and that. Well, my webcam, which I've had for the last 5 years, died today. I tried to make this video earlier today, and all I got was a blank screen. So I went and bought a new webcam, and this particular webcam is a higher grade webcam. So hopefully you'll be able to hear me, and I don't know why you'd want to see me. I mean, I think listening is more important, actually. But anyway, you should be able to see me and hear me better. This supposedly has a much better microphone. So, give me a little feedback. This is the first video I've made with this new camera. So take care. And again, please subscribe to my Applied Metabolics newsletter, www.appliedmetabolics.com. And if you think this video was any good, please let others know about this channel, Jerry Brainham channel. To send them over. I put new videos on every Tuesday. Take care.